Today's gospel contains a story that many of us, especially those of us who were raised in the church, will recognize. Jesus feeds 5,000. The details of the story, particularly the boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, along with the 12 leftover baskets of bread, are usually emphasized. The walking on water scene that follows is usually told separately. However, what if we take any preconceived notions of this text, at least the ones that we recognize, and hold them at bay for a little bit? Let's start by looking at the context of this passage. In the previous chapter of John, over and over it is repeated that Jesus is sent from the Father. And the beginning of this passage mentions that Jesus had been doing signs of healing. In other words, we know from where Jesus came and what Jesus has been doing, but we are left with another question. Who is Jesus? Jesus' miraculous feeding holds a kind of cultural memory that begins to answer this question. First, it remembers when God fed Israel in the wilderness with manna. Manna was the bread that rained down from the heavens while Israel wandered in the desert. The Israelites were to gather just enough manna for each person for that day and not keep it until the next day, except for on the day before the Sabbath. Jesus' abundant bread is like manna in that it is a gift and it satisfies. However, it is unlike manna in that the people collected more than what could be consumed on that one day. There would be leftovers. It is the shared nature of the bread and manna that connects Jesus with Moses. The feeding of 5,000, however, also contains many shared features with the feeding miracle that occurred during the ministry of Elisha in 2 Kings 4:42 through 44. Similar elements between the two miracles include someone offering food on behalf of the people, a person close to the leader doubting how it could satisfy all who were present, the satisfaction of all who were present, and that there were leftovers. The similarities between these feeding miracles connects Jesus with Elisha. And so it is through the provision of bread that John connects the ministry of Jesus with Moses and the Exodus, as well as with Elisha the prophet. And the crowd seems to pick up on this, for after the 12 baskets of leftovers have been filled, the crowd mutters that Jesus is the prophet who is to come into the world. And yet, just when the crowd seems to understand that Jesus is not just a dude with a cool party trick, they misunderstand. After they experienced Jesus as the host over an abundant meal, or as a source of bread, they wanted to profit off his power to make him their king. And in doing so, they missed who Jesus was and what they thought Jesus could do for them. Interestingly, interwoven into this description of host is imagery from Psalm 23. Jesus as the host in John contains parallels with the shepherd in Psalm 23. Both know where the good grass is and leads the sheep or people to recline there, trusting the shepherd to provide and protect. The crowd in this chapter of John's Gospel are the sheep, invited to recline as they eat on the grass and to trust the host, Jesus, to provide. Even though the crowd experienced Jesus as the shepherd host, they didn't get it. They didn't understand who he was. However, the story is not yet over. Jesus is not only revealing who he is to the crowds, he is revealing who he is to the disciples. And he does this through theophany. Theophany is just a big fancy word for when God shows up in the Bible, especially in a tangible way. Highlights in the BuzzFeed article about theophanies might include when Hagar talks with the messenger of the Lord in the desert, and when Moses sees God's glorious backside, for starters. In this passage, the disciples find themselves in a boat far from land, over deep water, at night, in a fierce storm, and Jesus comes walking up to them. It is notable that nothing is mentioned about their fearing the storm. Instead, they are terrified of Jesus. It is precisely their terror at the sight of Jesus which suggests that this is a theophany. That when Jesus says, "It is I," he's not saying, "It's just me, guys." He's saying, "I am," as in the same "I am who I am" that Moses encountered in the burning bush. In other words, whether the disciples understood it or not, Jesus seems to be saying, "I am God." And it seems that the disciples responded with faith, for immediately they wanted to take Jesus into the boat. And when they did, they immediately reached their destination. Through today's gospel narrative, the question, who is Jesus, is answered in many ways. Jesus is a healer, a host, like a shepherd, a source of bread, a prophet, a servant of God like Moses and Elisha, and God in the flesh. And so I wonder, which of these answers to the question, who is Jesus, resonates most with you at this time, and why?